I'm Antoinette James. Welcome to Behind the Beehive, where I look behind the political show and try and reveal the truth. And today's truth is that our education system in New Zealand is not fitting our children for a rounded education, a good education, and for a solid adult experience, especially in the 20s and 30-year age group. Early 2000s, we got the United Nations Common Core curriculum, just covertly slipped in with the NCA change to the way we educate, particularly, well, the whole way through, but particularly once students get to 14, 15, 16. Well, it's actually 15, 16, 17, isn't it now? Keeping our children as infants much longer. People write books about it, but anyway. David Rockefeller famously said about education, we don't want thinkers, we want workers. And that is why we have outcome-based education in our socialized schools today, because it's educating to fit that person for work. It's not there to fit that person for a life of choice. And so that's really why home educating is an option that really needs to be looked at and see how that might fit into your lifestyle. School, it's all about propaganda, brainwashing, thumping in the narrative. And we know the narrative today is a climate emergency, climate change, global warming, which is total porky. Yes, we are going through a Maunder minimum. There will be some issues, but our government's not telling us that that's a natural occurrence that cycles through the decades and through the centuries and is instigated by the sun, totally outside of our little bubble. The other thing, overpopulation. I remember being hammered with that when I was at school, and I remember saying to someone that I was going to have 2 children to replace myself and my husband, and then I was going to adopt. Well, we did try and adopt several times, would love to have done that, but we had 6 children, so obviously all the brainwashing and propaganda didn't quite work as well once I got out of school and shook it all off. The other thing too is that humans are unsustainable, and our students are being told that, you know, to own a property, to have a vegetable garden, to have any of the choices and luxuries of the 21st century is unsustainable, and peasanthood is where they need to return to. And on that note, we are now in the United Nations Decade of Biodiversity Restoration. Restoration means back to as good as new. That means pre-human. So when we have Comrade Ardern tell us about the Waikato Initiative, about all the Sustainable Development Goals in her voluntary national review, to the elites at the United Nations, all the rhetoric is all about underpinning climate change, overpopulation, biodiversity loss, and humans as being unsustainable. I know as freedom fighters, we're all wanting to push back in whatever way we can. And there are a myriad of different ways. Some people might be able to write a list and tick several of them. Others may only be able to tick 1 or 2. Doesn't matter. We just all need to push back. And home educating is one way of pushing back. It's like saying, goodbye swamp. I'm exiting the swamp. I'm exiting this tyranny, this jurisdiction that I have been living under, this false, fake jurisdiction that I've been living under, and I'm coming out into freedom. And the more of us that do that in our different ways, the more we end up pushing back. That's the one thing from the COVID scamdemic, particularly in the USA, the number of people that were forced into home educating, and once they were able to send their children back to school, they said, "No, we're good, thanks, we can do this." Because they were forced to adjust the family life and then home educate, and they found that actually we can make all this work. We can have all these balls up in the air and we can keep them in the air. So, it is something worth looking at. You'll also know, as I have known for decades now. I've home educated our 6 children for, well, 27 years. My last child at 18, beginning of this year, I guess graduated from home education. I don't know what you want to call it. But 27 years I have been educating my children, and in that time there is pushback from people around you, from family and from media and from Hollywood and even Disneyland. I just cringed when, not that I like what Disneyland has done to beautiful Winnie the Pooh, but their motion movie, they had Kanga and they had little Joey in Kanga's pouch, and he was, you know, pocket educated or home educated, and the rhetoric that came out and the narrative that came out and the propaganda that came out just was cringe-worthy. But that is seen in many Hollywood movies, just to down the whole thing. So you know when the elites through their propaganda machines pushing back at a particular lifestyle, you know that's a good lifestyle they just don't want you to be part of. So yes, home educating does push back. At school, our children, in my humble opinion, are abused and accused. They are not allowed to flourish in their strengths. They are not allowed to be their own person. They are put into a echo chamber of socialism. They're put into a situation where they're competing from the age of 5, day after day after day, for 10 plus years with their peer group. They're shoved into a classroom of basically their own age group. It's the only place in the whole of society you'll find people being shoved into their own age group, and they're not allowed to socialize with, well, at least in the classroom format, with those older and those younger. And in fact, at school, most children will not socialize down because they're too cool, and no one does that. So there's this sort of cut off, and that therefore makes them choose their friendship group in a very small pool of choice. Often not the best friends, perhaps, and it is the parents' prerogative and the parents' right to be the ones that finally give the okay on friendships. We're nurturing our beautiful children. We don't plant a tree and just let it tangle itself any which way. We stake it, keep it from being broken by the wind, make sure the weeds don't get it. You know, there's a whole pruning process to bringing a strong tree, that apple tree, for example, it's going to bear fruit. And it's the same when we train our children's life, input into our children's life. So our children are also being accused that, you know, they're not sporty enough, or they're not diverse enough. You know, well, actually, they say that they're not embracing the narrative enough. School talks about diversity and all that type of thing. They do not like diversity. If you're going to have an opinion or a narrative outside of what the curriculum is presenting to the children, that child is going to struggle. I've heard horrible stories about children presenting their perspective, and the teacher have said, "Oh, I'm so disappointed that you don't agree with the rest of the class." You know, so our children are going to be used and abused. Also, the big thing is our children, when they go to school, are often weaponized against the family, against the parents. That's where we get the generation gap. No such thing until that was created in around the 60s, I think. Just a way of breaking the family. Before then, there was a lot of cohesion, and the curriculum hadn't really ramped up at that stage either. Rockefeller had got hold of the education curriculum across the West, was changing it, but still in the 60s, you know, you had probably teachers that were raised in the 30s and 40s, so they still had that kind of feeling of family and community. But now, now you get our teachers today, on the whole, there's always an exception, I am aware of that, but our teachers on the whole have spent 10 plus years in an institutionalized, socialized education. Then many of them then go to, well, university now, and then finish on a year at School of Education or whatever they do to put that cap year on their studies. So They have never been in the real world. They've only lived in this socialist education, Marxist environment for, well, and if they're in preschool, maybe from months old right through to, well, I'm going to say early 20s. Well, good luck trying to untangle that. And we know a teacher is only good as their teacher. So they've learnt all this worldview, I suppose, from their teachers. So they're not going to be any better than their teachers. So we're actually getting worse and worse, and that's why teachers' curriculum is really outcome based now, and they've got to work to the Aero, and Aero comes and reviews them. Have you got your class through the sausage factory yet? So my talk today is free range children, and that's what home educated children are. We like free range eggs. We wouldn't really want to go and buy battery eggs, and that's what school basically is doing to the mindset of our children, because school is a pathway to work. They don't want critical thinking. It's all hive mind. It's consensus learning, and that's why they work often in groups, particularly in the primary years. Why we have peer pressure and peer dependency rife within the school classroom environment. So we need to fight and exit the swamp and find ways that we can find strategies for us to be on the winning side in this battle, which is going to go on for a wee while. I am totally convinced we're on the winning side, but the swamp's not going to let go easily. We really need to be picking up the pace and saying, okay, what else can I do? And I can tell you, as a home educating mum, the stress of life, gone. Yeah, it's hard to believe. You think, no, gone. And my book here, 101 Reasons to Home Educate in the 21st Century. I'll talk about that a little bit more, and that goes into everything, expands much more on the points that I'm talking about this morning. But it's made me think, I've talked often about the last populist uprising that happened 500 years ago under Martin Luther, that took the whole of Europe out of a 1,000-year dark age of tyranny and restricted narrative. And in fact, if you didn't agree with the tyranny above you, with the rulership, you were put to death or put onto galleys to row your way out of life, as it were. And it's made me think, so, word of mouth is great. They didn't have the internet back then. So, I don't care what the Silicon Valley try and do. Silly them. Do they really think it's going to work? It's going to bounce back against them. But the one thing that I have been thinking about from now compared to then is that children weren't isolated from the family. So therefore, critical thinking back then, although they tried to hammer it down and all sorts of rules and regulations and suspicion, it wasn't a good time to be alive, but their children were with them. They were apprenticed into life, and that's what home educating does. That is, I guess, it's known also as like the Hebrew model, where you apprentice your child into life, where the Roman model or the Greek model is take your child out of the home and put them in what they called gymnasiums or schools. Spartans did that as well. You remove that child so that you can train that child. The Spartans, all they wanted was fighters. That child was removed as of the day they were weaned, and they were put into their gymnasiums to become fighters later on in life, with no familial connection with their families. And that's where I think things are problematic today. These children 500 years ago, they were peasants. They owned nothing, but they had their critical thinking, and they were home educated. It was a different type of home education, no doubt, in those days, because keeping the people illiterate was a biggie, which it is today, but in a different sense. We're allowed to read, but our words and what we read have been so dumbed down, which I go into in my book, and I'll leave it there at that point. So that's why I think it's another good reason to really think, is home educating right for myself as a mum or a dad, and for our family, and even extended family. You know, we should be intergenerational. That's another thing that's been dissolved and destroyed through life today. So when you're apprenticed into life, you have life skills abounding. You're not shut away in an institution. Some from, as I say, from months old, they can't even see what's happening out in the street. They have no idea of what happens outside their four walls. And schools are getting like that as well. You know, they're starting to close in, they're starting to lock their pupils in. Parents aren't able to, particularly with this COVID, you know, really push the parents away from engaging with the teacher. In New Zealand, as a parent, legally, another reason to get out of their jurisdiction, legally, I'm a, oh, the word's gone. I'm a caregiver. I'm a guardian. There it is. Got it. And the school teacher is loco parentis, which means in place of the parent. So they get all the legality, nuances around them as far as being able to make decisions for your beautiful child. They're making those decisions. They don't need to let you know anything there. And they will decide everything for that child. Now, we know, well, first let me just read you. Schooling, compulsory schooling's only been around for 150, 200 years, and it was really pushed by the humanists back in the 1800s and 1700s, and it was first really promoted in the USA. Many states chose not to make it compulsory for a while, and I'll leave it there because in We Are Revolting I go into great detail of how the education system really has been hijacked, and the child has been stripped of any vestige of self and a vision for its future. So let's listen to what the humanist John Dunphy said. Now, he said this in a Humanism magazine in 1983, or at least it was published. I should have checked out. I think he was I got a funny feeling he might have been long gone before then. I should have checked out his dates. Sorry about that. He said this: I am convinced that the battle for mankind's future must be waged and won in the public school classroom by teachers who correctly perceive their role as proselyters of a new faith, a religion of humanity. Sounds like United Nations to me. The teacher must embody the same selfless dedication as the most rapid fundamentalist preachers, for they will be ministers of another sort, utilizing a classroom instead of a pulpit. The classroom must and will become an arena of conflict between the old and the new, the rotting corpse of Christianity together with its adjacent evils and miseries, and a new faith of humanism. Okay, humanism. You're looking at Darwinism, you're looking at Aristotelism, which I've sort of looked at, as mentioned before. So no longer are you a person, spirit, soul and body. You're just a worker for the state. Those that will rule and those that must be ruled. At the time in the 1800s, when school was really starting to become compulsory, there was a backlash. People thought this was an appalling thing, but, you know, if we don't really get up and understand what's happening and really push back, tyranny wins the day. And we know they have. It's compulsory. And I've got to say, here in New Zealand, you know, it's not compulsory education, because you're not going to get educated at school. Here in New Zealand, it's compulsory attendance of a school. That's all it is. And when you home educate, you are compelled to teach as regularly and as well as if they were at school. That's it. Well, there's an easy bar to pass, and it's easy to surpass. Here's a voice that fought back. His name is Robert L. Dabney. He was a Presbyterian theologian in the 1800s. He said this: "It is the teaching of the Bible and of sound political ethics that the education of children belong to the sphere of the family and is the duty of parents, because only the parents are going to hand down what's important to them anyway, and their values and virtues and culture, you know. Whoa. Okay, he goes on. Now, by what apology does the state justify itself in stepping into revolutionizing that order? The theory that a child of the Commonwealth are the charge of the Commonwealth is a pagan one. Yep. Derived from heathen Sparta and Plato's heathen republic, and connected by regular logical sequence with the dissolution of conjugal ties, familial ties with the family, and it just rips that apart. So that was the cry, the lashback against it that didn't win the day. Now here's a George Bernard Shaw, boo! But let's listen to him. He has something very interesting to say about education. He says this: and there is, on the whole, nothing on earth intended for innocent people so horrible as a school. George Bernard Shaw was home educated, by the way. He goes on, to begin with, it is a prison. Yep. But it is in some respects more cruel than a prison. In a prison, for instance, you are not forced to read books written by the warders, who of course would not be warders and governors if they could write reasonable books, and beaten or otherwise tormented if you cannot remember their unmemorable contents. In the prison, you are not forced to sit listening to the turnkeys discoursing without charm or interest on subjects they don't understand and don't care about, and therefore incapable of making you understand or care about. In prison, they may torture your body, but they do not torture your brains, and they protect you against violence and outrage from your fellow prisoners. In school, you have none of these advantages, and that is very, very true. Here's one more. I have two. Waldo Emerson, and I do believe he was home educated as well. He says this: he lived in the 1800s, died in 1882. He was an American poet and lecturer, philosopher, and he says this: we are students of words. We are shut up in schools and colleges and recitation rooms for 10 or 15 years and come out with a bag of wind, a memory of words, and do not know a thing. And that is what schooling is. Studies were done a few decades ago now. It's happened all over the world, these studies, but in Otago. And the findings were that 40 to 50% of what our children here in New Zealand learn at school, they already know. So they're sitting there for half of their school, 10 plus years, listening to things they already know. And the reason why they know it is because at the end of the day, regardless if your child's at school or if your child's at home educated, the parent still is the primary educator of that child. So it all happens in the home one way or another. We have been brainwashed to think the expert is the only person that is qualified enough to teach our children, but this isn't so. This expert thing has crept up on us for a few decades now, and we somehow seem to think that people can only do a certain thing if they've got these bits of paper in their hand. Well, that isn't so. As I said, compulsory schooling's only been around for less than 200 years, and before that, people taught themselves. They were taught in the home, and often around the age of 10, maybe 14, somewhere around there. They, way back, then went to the local parish where the minister who could read would then teach them to read. And that is the key, the golden key, the golden bullet to home education. If you teach and when you teach your child to read, they are then able to educate themselves. and often you have particularly a firstborn for some weird reason, but there's answers to that as well, but I'm not going into that today. But firstborns are obviously often great readers and just love reading and are real book lovers. They don't tend to be so interested in playing, like number 2 and number 3 will be children that like to play with their toys. I'm not saying this is always so, but often that first one isn't so much engaged in its toys. It wants the adult company, and it seems to engage more in books. I've got 2 firstborns in a way, because when you learn about birth order, if there's more than a 5-year gap between children, that next child becomes what's known as a firstborn again and has the traits of being a firstborn. And both my firstborns are great book lovers and accelerated in literacy. So I don't know. There it is. So, and the other thing, you see, education isn't a race. At school, you're squirted through like a sausage factory. It doesn't matter if you've got a child that's home educating and they're still working on their books at 18 or 19. Doesn't matter if your child's finished home educating at 15. My first 4 children had finished. I'd given them everything I could give them by the age of 15. And they all entered tertiary at 16, with one stepping straight into university. She went to Massey University through discretionary entry. And she was an A-plus student, by the way. And she was there with all the 17, 18, 19, 20-year-olds, but she held her own. But I'll get onto that in a minute, getting ahead of myself. So, you know, critical thinking is the important thing, and knowledge is learnt. Good and bad knowledge is learnt through having a chance to read and using critical thinking, using learning logics, I suppose, fallacies. What's a fallacy? I did a lot of that with my children, just looking at letters to the editor. We followed and tracked some of those, and we said, well, that's a fallacy, that's a good argument, and started learning a little bit about logics. And that is the trivium. I taught the trivium, sort of. I didn't go into, I wasn't fixed to it. I'm going to talk about that tomorrow, some of the pitfalls as a parent when you're home educating. The bottom line, do what you want to do and enjoy. Research shows that even if you're a so-called, and you can't be, but so-called poor teacher as a mum, your child bounces back. If they have a poor teacher at school, they're stuck with it. They can't really bounce back, such as the structure of school and also the theory of education. Once a child or any learner goes into an institution, the theory of education is destroyed. And I go into that in 101 Reasons. Right, and I'll talk about more on that tomorrow, about how you get information, because the big thing I'll tell you right now, as a teacher, you don't need to know everything. No way. Who can? All you need to do is know how to access that information. Reliable websites. The library's still a great choice. Networking with other home educating families. A wealth. I'll talk about that tomorrow. Intergenerational. The whole thing is just a wonderful, complete and broad education for children. Real learning doesn't start until the child is 14. Before 14, you're really just looking at the 3 R's. So that's all you need to engage in. And you're just, you'll do much more, but I'm just saying. And you're really just laying the learning platform. A child needs to learn to read before they can enjoy reading. That's what I used to say to my children. You're learning so you can enjoy it. Maths, I'm teaching you maths so that you can enjoy nature, because nature screams mathematics. It wasn't a human construct. Nature screams symmetry and geometry and statistics and numbers and so on and so forth. It screams it, and you learn that as well. And that's where maths found its first basis. So, okay, a lot of people being home educated in history. Most of the early presidents of the United States, and prior to the 1800s, well, everyone, And think of who we call our fathers of science and our fathers of philosophy. They were all home educated. Once school came into the scenario through the Prussian system, that they didn't, back in Prussia, they were losing the battles. So they decided, okay, let's put all these peasants that are thinking on their own, let's get them into school. We'll ring the bell, and they'll be Pavlov's dogs, and they'll forget what they've just learnt, but they will be good, obedient little citizens when we get them up to being the war machine. And that's where it happened. So the humanists thought, whoa, love that, went over, studied the pattern over in Prussia, brought it back to the United States, and then spread that out, because we don't want thinkers. So that's where everything fell apart. Yehudi Menuhin, home-educated, Margaret Mead, George Bernard Shaw, Agatha Christie, Pearl Buck, she's an author, Bertrand Russell, Noel Coward, the playwright, John Stuart Mill, philosopher of the 19th century, C.S. Lewis, and Thomas Edison. That's just a few. I mean, of course, everyone was home educated. But what has been forgotten today is that we as parents are first educators. And that tends to be the domain of the mum. It doesn't have to be. But women tend to be better multitaskers. We tend to be more the nurturers. There's a lot of things. And even today, 90, probably 5, maybe 98% of the primary home educator is the mum across the world and here in New Zealand. And so that is just a natural expression. You do that from day one. You're talking to your baby. You just grow into teaching your child. Yes, some mothers are forced back to work and the child goes to an early child care centre, so that is totally interrupted, and that does have repercussions, sadly. But if you are a mother that has been at home with your child and you haven't got the mindset that I'll get my life back when the child goes to school, which is a very, very sad state of mind. Why have the child in the first place? Your child is your life. Enjoy. Whoa. We enjoy people, we enjoy fellowship with other human beings, with our peer group. Your children should be more precious than anyone. They're an absolute joy to have around you. Should be. So it's not getting your life back. My mantra was, have children will travel. And that was great when I was in my coffee group. As all the other children entered school, my children were still there, and they became the older children that played with the younger children and made games with them at the coffee group. So I actually became or at least my children did, became a little bit of an asset. So yes, the mums were still engaged. I don't believe children raising children. They were in eyesight, but they were just having such a ball, and our children really enjoyed sharing and giving out, because what you learn has to go somewhere. And as you learn, whatever stage in life, as you learn, you need to get that out, and then it establishes a bigger picture in you, and you've got an outlet for it. And even children need that as well. So that was the way it went in my little home group, and so it's a mothercraft, the same as we learn how to look after our babies. And a lot of us don't really know. I hadn't touched a baby, really, ever, until I had my own baby. I was good to go for about 2 years and up, because I had retrained from microbiology into what was then kindergarten training, quite different than early childhood training. But however, we'll leave that there. So I suddenly thought, so that's why women need to network and have that. It is a craft. It's not something that happens naturally. It's a craft. So, whether it's breastfeeding or all the little milestones, or the milestones your child aren't meeting, that was known. That was part of the mothercraft that you and your peers and your mothers and aunties and women older than you were able to hand that down. All that's been cut off now, and now we go to Plunkett or National Health or whatever. I had a friend, must be 15 years ago now, was a Plunkett nurse. She pulled out because she wasn't allowed to give any advice like that. Had to be only what was in the book. Otherwise, she was in danger of being fired. So she thought, well, not for me. So you're not going to get any really solid advice. A friend of mine recently the Plunkett nurse was trying to force vaccines on their little boy, and one was one of the hepatitises, and my friends and his wife said, but you know, that's because of it being a sexually transmitted disease. How is my 18-month, or no, he was younger, 9-month-old, ever going to be in that situation when later on he will need a booster? And the Plunkett nurse said, oh, I didn't know that. Yep, that's about the caliber we have across the board with our experts today. We need to gather more at a grassroots level, and a home educating family, the qualities of a home educating family is amazing, and statistically they have more input, positive input into their community than schooled families, because we've never left the community, and it's a great community to belong to, and it's everywhere, all over New Zealand, a great community. So it's Mothercraft. Okay, so 2004, quite a few years ago now, I wrote the first book on home educating in New Zealand that had ever been written, homegrown book in New Zealand, published in New Zealand. Everything else up until 2004 were from the US, and that sold really well. It had a lot of exemption, how to apply for your exemption, so it became a little bit time sensitive in that regard, but all the curriculum information was all good to go. And also testimonies of my children. My eldest one was about 10 or 11 at that, yes, about 10 at that stage. So that was my first one. 2 years later, I wrote another one, Call Us, which is mainly for a Christian community, because oddly enough, I wrote that for anyone. Hey, think about it. And certain voices in the Auckland home educating community were horrified that it wasn't Christian enough. Poor lovies. Anyway, so I thought, oh, got hammered. So I thought, all right, here you go. Here you go. This is for you. And so this is called Call Us, a homeschooling family, which is what the government call us. But we don't, because we don't bring school into the home. That's one thing you must never do. Home is no place for that school structure. So we tend to call ourselves home educating family. But I've got that one crossed out, and here I've got a biblical Christian family, because this is home educating from a Christian perspective. Does the Bible say home educate? Well, no, it doesn't. So how do I know it is a biblical pattern to follow as your plan A, school being your plan B? So this is really just I guess a big Bible study in a way. My daughter, I don't know how old she was, I don't know, 10. She did some of the illustrations. There's one little one here of a boy or a person driving a car. And my husband, I put in a quote from my husband. He says, sending your Christian child to school is like expecting them to drive a car with flat tires. At best, their progress will be hindered, and at worst, they'll never reach their destination. But I suggest that's the same for anyone. You don't have to be a Christian. All those wonderful values and culture that belongs to you will never be handed down properly in this indoctrinated classrooms of schools in New Zealand. At the back of this book too, I do sell this book, and it's also on Amazon. At the back of the book, I've got 23 excuses that I've personally heard from people that have given me the reason why they had thought about it, but it wasn't for them because, and I kind of think, well, it's probably gone through your mind, but you probably haven't thought about it, because all the excuses are totally null and void. Statistics prove them all wrong. Things like, I'm a solo parent. There's lots of solo parents home educating very successfully. I can't control my child. That can be overcome. You can. You need to get back in touch with your parenthood. I can't teach maths. Well, don't worry, neither can I. But, you know, you don't have to know all the things. You just need to find the right curriculum. I had a child that decided she was going to learn French at 11 or 12. So I thought, okay, I'd already done Latin for a year, which unfortunately we couldn't carry on with, and it inspired her to do French. We got an interactive CD, and away she went. She, in 6 months, was actually looking pretty good. So I thought, oh, it's time now to find a tutor. It cost us a small fortune, but my daughter had shown herself, she proved herself willing to learn and wanting to learn. And actually, by the time she was 22, I think, she was living in Toulouse in France, fluent in French, never having been to school, and was actually at university in Toulouse. She had a friend there from Hungary, and neither of them, my daughter couldn't speak Hungarian, the Hungarian girl couldn't speak English, so they were forced to talk in French, and they're still good friends to this day. Anything's possible. You look for your child's strength, and that's what I did. I never rushed around trying to get my children to do all these different things. I looked for a willingness and think, well, that's a natural desire. Except my children were expected to learn a musical instrument, and they were expected to either do a sport or a dance. And I had one girl do tap dancing, the other 3 did ballet. My boys did soccer and archery and epi, sword fighting. Right, so those are those books. Now this book, Home Educating in New Zealand, is this. All the good things in this, extrapolated, because this is no longer in print. It was done by Zenith Printing back in Zenith Publications way back in 2004. It's all in this book, plus literally 101 reasons why you would want to home educate in the 21st century. Good paragraphs, sometimes half page, sometimes a page, really getting you to understand the reasons. So you might even have a question right now. Well, you know, what about this? You will find it in this book. I promise you that, because I just squirreled all over the place and brainstormed, engaged my family, saying, come on, I've only got 89 reasons. Give me more. I need 101. This is back in 2017, 2016 when I was putting it together. So it's got literally 101. It's full of curriculum ideas, and not only this one follows my children up to about the age of 10, so you know all their different pathways. 6 children with, well, actually at that stage, my 5th, oh no, there he is. My 6th child was born, but my 2 little boys were preschoolers. So that only takes the girls with their curriculum up to about the age of 10, 11, moving into that kind of what we'd call intermediate if we're reflecting against the school model. This one takes right up through to tertiary. I lay it all out, particularly my daughter that went to university, went to Massey University in her first year, applied for Auckland University and carried on there in her 2nd and 3rd year as an A+ student. She graduated at, 19 is it? She went straight, invited by the faculty to do honours, but she was also offered to apply for a job. She said, Mum, what should I do? I said, take the job, you're enough already. And so she did that. She's now in publishing in London and doing very well there. Never been to school in her life. Okay, so in 101 Reasons, boys can be boys. I discussed that because home educating boys is going to be a whole lot different than home educating girls. That's why boys don't do so well. They're expected to sit down with a fine motor skill, eye-hand coordination. They are not boy traits. Gather around in groups and discuss things. That is not a boy way of learning. That's a girl. Let's chat about it. Let's share, you know. Let's dialogue. Nah, it's not the boys' way. Where do you find boys in class? At the very back. Why? Because their thinking patterns tend to be a bit slower, and the girls get their hand up first. Often the boys, because if they are in mixed classes, feel shy, particularly as they get up the years. Girls are their education flourishes more in the institution because it's all about feminine learning. So the boys are at a total disadvantage right then. Most of them have never had a male teacher, and many of our beautiful boys do not have a dad at home, so they have no male role model. They don't see their father reading. They don't see their father on a laptop or whatever, so they don't get that early education. And you know what they say about reading? Reading is caught, not taught. And once you start teaching your children, as I've taught my 6, and I go into all the strategies, because I've had some that learnt to read at 4. I've had a child much later. Go into my strategies and what you need to know for a successful, quiet and easy read. Well, easy way of teaching them to read. Doesn't matter if they're not even going by the time they're 6. Doesn't matter. We're not in a competitive school environment. We're nurturing our beautiful child. By the time they're 8, no one's going to know the difference. It's like teething and when they walk. By the time they're 5, no one knows what age your child teethed. So, take that whole school narrative out of your head and just start engaging. Children are more intelligent. And remember, intelligence and academics are 2 different things. I have some very academic children. I do not have, and I also have some that are not particularly academic, but all of my children are intelligent. And because that intelligence is learnt as they've walked through life under a parent, because they haven't been squirreled away outside of the real world. They saw me cry when my little niece died. They saw me go and fight for another family member that was being victimized. They saw me get up. They saw me pray. They saw me stop studies to ask them to pray with me. They were with me when we did the grocery shop. They knew what my budget was. They were apprenticed into life. That makes someone intelligent. And that's what they say with those that go to university. 80% of success in university is life skills. And home-educated children have that in abundance. Research also shows that how well your child performed at school has no bearing on how well they will perform at university. There's a little bit of a different type of learning, a style that is needed. Just because you've got an A student at school does not mean that child is going to do well at university. So if you want to have your child go to uni, think carefully about whether they should be home educated. University readiness, go into all that. Did my children sit exams? No. Why would I do that? Why would I put stress on them? Having said that, they did do a spelling test each week, and they did a times table test each week once they were a little bit older. And then I taught them how to sit exams when they were a lot older. Particularly some of my children did music and obviously theory of music, and they sat national exams outside the classroom. So I needed to teach them how to time themselves. It's not a hard thing to do. Taught them how to write essays, how the introduction needs to coordinate with the conclusion, and how you put your paragraphs together. It's all accessible. You don't even need to know that yourself. Find it when it's needed and off you go. You're really trying to get your children to build up their vocabulary. I didn't expect big, lots of writing like some home educating parents did. No. I worked on sentence starters. How can we think of an exciting way to start that sentence? And I also worked on building up their adjectives and their adverbs so that they had the tools then to write successfully. And when they did write, which they loved, all of them, loved as they got older, once they got to 8 and 9, which I talk about in my book and the games they used to play, I didn't worry about their spelling because I wanted them to love expressing themselves in the written word. I kept spelling for the spelling. I might have rung around a few of those words, or I might not have, and I might have just tucked that into their next week's spelling. This isn't a race, this isn't a competition. So those goes into that. University readiness and diseases. I talk about the pandemics, how safe you are as a home educating family and particularly your children. So Then we all have those questions. What about socializing of your children? Your children's best model of socializing is in the home. If your child can get on with the brothers and sisters and mum and dad in a respectful, loving, fun, pulling each other's legs sort of way, that child will be good outside the family. So often school children are all, sunshine with their peers, but come home and just give their own brothers and sisters and parents a rough deal. You don't get that when you home educate, because they are not role modeling with their peers. We don't lock them in a cupboard somewhere. They're out there. Homeschooling community. We belong to Haskell way back in Auckland. Performing arts, sports, you name it. My children were in it. In fact, they were in Girls Brigade and music and sports, netball. My girls played. We were all over the show. Friends coming over all the time. Church life, big social scene for them. In fact, it was really hard. As a home educating mum, you've got to be careful you're not out there all the time. You've really got to say, actually, no, we're staying in and getting on with whatever. At school, most of the time you're told to be quiet, and if you're not, you're off to the principal's office, or your detention, or worse still, put on Ritalin for ADHD. No. There's no socializing at school. No true socializing. It's peer pressure, peer dependency, and your child learns a lot of things way before they need to. And remember, you get a childhood once, just once. And psychologists say everyone has a childhood. When are they going to have that childhood? Are you going to have your childhood in your childhood years, or are you going to have your childhood as an adult, like Michael Jackson? He had his childhood as an adult. Mozart was another example of that. We need to give our children their childhood while they're children. Empathy, play is big time storing up empathy in a child's soul. And at school, they're not allowed to play. Up to the age of 8 is very important, a lot of play. And when you're home educating, you do have that. And of course, they're not in a competitive environment. They're just chugging on. And, if I had to do some work with my children or correct a few things, the other children didn't need to know about that, And even if they did, we were in a loving environment. At school, you make a mistake or you're the dummy. You have to live with that for the rest of your life. If you're make a mistake or the dummy, which you're not, in a home educating situation, that's family, very forgiving, gone. It's not going to be put on social media. No one's going to be texting about you. You're good to go. How do I know what to teach? The 3 R's, and get on with what your children want to learn. They will dictate the pace. All in here. Bit of a balance there. I'm not a teacher. Thankfully, the people I've found that struggle the most are the people that have been to Teachers Training College. They have a very interesting way and take on home educating. They tend to be more structured. They tend to bring the school into the home because that's all they know. No. We all sat round the table, all the age groups, number little Bubby, whatever number that was, in the high chair playing with whatever, and maybe another one on the floor with a play frame. And we all learnt the same thing. We'd sit there, we'd have our devotions, we'd sing some songs. I had a scrapbook that I made up over the years called Today in History. We'd look at that, what happened in history today. And you can go online and find that out. My mum and I collected from the Herald each day over a few years. And then if something caught our interest, we'd get out the encyclopedias, which I bought from school fetes and garage sales. Wonderful resources. Then we could teach the children how to use dictionaries. And, you're tooling your child. They can teach themselves. It's all good. Easy peasy and a lot of fun. My children don't listen to me. That's because they don't respect you. That's because they're out there learning the generation gap and you're just mum. You don't really know what you're doing. I've got the expert teaching me, Mum, you don't know. And particularly now with the curriculum, you wouldn't know. Particularly maths. They've reshaped the whole maths, which is way outside of the ability of most children. They brought maths right down. Abstract thinking does not kick in till about the age of 8. And they brought maths right down to 5 and 6 year olds. Those are the years of arithmetic, not mathematics. Those little years are the language years. So your children will listen to you, and you need to hit the reset button with your relationship. Home educating only works if you've got a good relationship. And if you're pulling your child out of school, you may just need to do what they call as unschooling, or just have a month off. Do a big project together. That's what I would suggest. You know, we did lots of projects. We did a backyard blitz, because that was on television at the time. So we did our own backyard and videoed it. And even my little 5-year-old, she was the person who looked after the slugs and snails, and with her little lisp on the video, she made sure that they were all rehomed. Others were pulling other things down. And, you know, do a project. When you work together, you stay together. I couldn't home ed my children because they don't get on well. Same thing. No, of course they don't, because you're not allowed to get on well with someone under you. You stay with your peer. It's dog eat dog. You'd like to go up to upper class to socialize, but they won't allow you. So we need to sort all that out. Now, I was going to talk about some stories of my children, just to give you a bit of a feel, but they're all in this book. I can see that I typically run far too long, but I do just want to finish with this quote. Another home-educated boy, Christopher Paolini, and he was the author of Aragon. That was a great success. He finishes home education early, as you do. What you can do at home in a day is what takes school sometimes a week, 2 weeks to do. So 1 week home educating, enjoying what the children want, all around, all learning the same thing at their different levels. In a week, you're doing what might take 2 months at school. So you're actually quietly, not Zooming, because you're not making sausages here, but your children will love it, because it's just fun as they drink their Milos around the table and have a few jokes and have a bit of time out. Sometimes we say, okay, everyone, let's have everyone outside, and we set up a netball court. So with all the children, we just play netball for half an hour and just, you know, get our heads in the right in the fresh air in the right space and back inside. We'd have wild and wet days. If a child was unwell, well, they still sat up at the table, but when it was someone's birthday, day off, and it was a lot of excitement. It's a great lifestyle. Let me just read on closing. Christopher: homeschooling was a wonderful and rewarding experience, he says. It gave me the freedom to explore subjects that caught my interest, whether it was dinosaurs, Icelandic sagas, or Egyptian pyramids, and it allowed me to work at my own pace and graduate early. So I had a couple of years free to write before I had to make the decision about college. That's like university in America. His parents didn't want him to go too early, so he had a couple of years, and maybe you'd call that a gap year. My 18-year-old is out working. He's very techy, a musician. He's got a bit of a comedy thing happening online as well with a few followers. But he's just hanging loose, having a gap year, enjoying himself. Flatting with a couple of people, one being my daughter, so good first safe environment for him. Christopher goes on. Our family is very close, which does happen, because that's what you want, a strong family. Since my sister is a little less than 2 years younger than I, we did lots of arts, science, and make-believe projects together. My mum created a curriculum that covered the basic subjects of maths, language, science, geography and history, art, music, and physical education. Mine was a homegrown curriculum for my children as well. It changed a little bit when my boys were a little bit older, all in there, so you know all the different pathways. Whenever possible, she gave us hands-on activities to help us learn through experimentation. We did that. We did a science experiment every Friday. We learnt a composer every Friday, listened to his music, and we also learnt all about an artist in context with the history, because art's political, as we know, so we put all that into context. So that Friday was a little bit different for us. Some supplementing with textbooks, workbooks, especially in mathematics. She was unwavering in her dedication to us and demanded that we make an effort each day. I did that as well. I expected their best. They didn't have to have something that was brilliant. No. I just wanted their best. That's all that's needed. So if they're still lagging behind in certain areas, if it's your best, good enough for me, and you're getting to know your abilities. She respected our creativity and encouraged us to explore ideas and things that interested us. He says it all. What he says about his writing of Eragon: overall, I think the most valuable thing I gained from homeschooling are a love of learning, confidence to find the answers to questions, and the ability to search many points of view before coming to my own conclusion. Sounds like critical thinking to me. Thanks, Mom and Dad. And that's what he said that helped him create Eragon, which, as we know, although the movie is quite different than the book, which is sad, but that's the way it goes, but, you know, a very accomplished young lad. I'm going to leave it there. It's been a bit of a long haul. Home educating is just so wonderful. I think I'll talk a little bit more about that tomorrow. But for now, thank you very much for joining me this morning, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bless you.